She screamed through my front window, not like someone asking for a cabin key, but like she was commanding an army. This, she declared, was community property now. She demanded I hand it over, or I would face serious fines. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand clutching a sealed black case. It bore the embossed white letters, Federal Emergency Use Only. The irony was, I had just unlocked it for a silent system test. She had no idea. She also didn't know the cabin was never mine to lend, rent, or even explain. It was federal property, cleverly disguised as a simple lakeside cabin, complete with coded entry, backup systems, a decontamination zone in the basement, and two-way communication lines that only activated if something had gone terribly wrong. And there she was, Karen, in flip-flops and a blouse that proclaimed her love for wine, demanding the very key authorized to trigger emergency communications for the entire region. I calmly placed the case on the table and stepped outside. "Karen," I said, "you need to leave before you get us both in trouble." She simply smiled, snatched the key from my belt, and marched towards the cabin door. Instantly, the lock blared red, and a disembodied voice announced, "Unauthorized access." Response activated. Everything changed in that moment. Karen had always been a nuisance. I had tolerated her leafleting my truck, her unauthorized signs along the road to the ridge, and even the time she called the county, falsely claiming I had illegal livestock. That incident, of course, was due to a pair of trail rescue goats I was temporarily housing in my barn. But this was different. This wasn't about goats or overgrown grass or the aesthetics of a driveway. This was about access. She intended to host her welcome brunch at my cabin, asserting it offered the best views and that denying community access was discriminatory. When I firmly, clearly, and repeatedly refused, she retaliated by calling an emergency HOA board meeting. In their usual self-affirming manner, the board decided the cabin fell within what they termed extended amenity zoning, a phrase I was sure wasn't real. Nevertheless, they produced official-looking paperwork, complete with maps highlighting my cabin in red marker, and declared a unanimous vote to include it. The critical detail they overlooked was that the cabin wasn't merely mine. It was a federal fallback site, a responsibility I had agreed to years ago under a signed non-disclosure agreement. It might appear rustic on the outside, but beneath its exterior, it was hardened, designed for use during natural disasters or significant grid failures. This meant it was not only exempt from HOA control, but it stood above it, protected by multiple layers of authorization. When I saw Karen ascending the slope that morning, dragging a fold-out podium and holding her phone as if broadcasting to a live Facebook audience, I knew the situation had escalated. She wasn't simply being obnoxious, she was staging an event. She positioned herself in front of the cabin with her small entourage of 8 or 9 HOA board members, most of whom appeared to be there solely for the free bagels. A few waved awkwardly in my direction as I emerged. Karen did not. She dramatically pulled a piece of paper from a blue folder, tapped her phone for effect, and began speaking as if delivering a policy change from the White House press room. "We, the members of Falcon Ridge Homeowners Association, hereby serve notice of amenity reallocation. The cabin behind me is now considered community property under Article 7 of our revised covenant." I waited for her to finish, then stated, "Karen, this isn't your jurisdiction, and that article doesn't even apply to me. I'm outside the HOA zone by half a mile." She blinked, then turned to her group. "He's resisting. Add that to the report." I calmly walked past her, unlocked the front door with my thumbprint, and let it shut behind me. She attempted to follow. The instant her hand touched the doorknob, the auto-lock buzzed and pulsed red. Karen recoiled, startled. "That's private property." I heard her shout through the door. I didn't respond. I was preoccupied with disabling the alert the lock had triggered. I hoped she would back down, that her little performance had garnered enough social media likes to satisfy her craving for power. I hoped this was the end. It wasn't. 2 hours later, a man in a tan vest, carrying a clipboard and wearing a fake badge, appeared. He claimed to be with County Recreational Compliance, a non-existent department, stating he had been sent to inspect the property for upcoming community events. I requested identification. He presented a laminated card with a blurry photo and no barcode. I called the actual county office, and they had no record of him. When I returned, he was walking around the cabin, suspiciously touching the solar panels. I told him to leave. He smirked and said, "Well, someone here's got something to hide." It was then I realized Karen would not stop until she gained entry. And if she succeeded, she would trigger more than just a lockout. She would potentially breach a sealed Federal Reserve cache, which activated a surveillance review the moment anyone tampered with it. So, I made a call, not to the sheriff, who had already made it clear he wanted no part of HOA drama. I dialed the contact number provided for imminent compromise. The call routed through 3 layers before a voice answered, "Command ready." Identify. I provided my clearance passphrase and explained that a private citizen had stolen the key and was attempting to gain access. I didn't need to use her name, they said. Understood. Eyes only. Verify lockdown status. Stand by for interim support. Within 20 minutes, that support arrived in the form of a black SUV, parked a mile down the access road. Karen didn't notice it. She was too busy orchestrating her next maneuver, a formal HOA inspection tour. When I saw her approaching the ridge with a group of 10 people, clipboards and coffee in hand, I stepped outside. She wore a wide grin, as if she had finally outsmarted a child. "I'm not here to fight," she announced loudly for the crowd. "I'm here to verify compliance with our new policy." I remained silent. I simply took out my phone and pressed a single button. A camera hidden in the trees above us whirred to life, focusing on her. She hesitated. "What's that?" she asked. "The beginning of your very expensive mistake," I replied. Then I opened the cabin door and stepped inside, letting it seal behind me. Karen didn't knock this time. She shouted, she cursed. Then she tried the back door. That's when the full system engaged. The internal panel flashed red. The override failed. A new voice spoke, "Unauthorized breach. Protocol escalation phase 1. The screen immediately flipped to infrared, displaying a satellite lock on the cabin's location. 30 seconds later, my emergency line rang again. Lockout confirmed. "Do you require extraction?" I answered, "No, not yet." Outside, Karen pounded on the door, her voice now trembling. "What did you do?" I didn't respond. I merely watched the satellite view slowly zoom in on her coordinates, not to frighten her, but to impress upon her that this wasn't about parties or policies or neighborhood supremacy. It was larger than her, larger than all of us. She just didn't realize it yet. The next morning began with an eerie quiet, as if the entire ridge held its breath. I brewed coffee, powered by the solar reserve, and stood by the one-way glass window, observing the HOA line below as if it were a border crossing. There was no sign of Karen, no clipboards, no fake inspectors, just the birds, the trees, and the quiet hum of a cabin that now knew it was under scrutiny. The alert had deactivated overnight after I completed the multi-level security reset and restored the biometric controls. However, one thing had irrevocably changed: the system had logged Karen's unauthorized touch. Her name was now on a list, one I could not erase, even if I wished to. And knowing Karen, this silence was not surrender, it was planning. By noon, my suspicion was confirmed. A truck with magnetic decals reading Falcon Ridge Event Services ascended the hill, towing a trailer filled with folding tables, pop-up tents, and a battery-powered speaker tower. It wasn't Karen who emerged first, it was her husband, a man I had only ever seen from a distance. He always wore polos, always sunglasses, always nodded, but never spoke. Today, he approached with 2 other men and handed me a letter. This wasn't on HOA stationery, it came from a local event planning company, claiming the HOA had contracted them to host a neighborhood event on the ridge, and that I had agreed to provide the cabin as a venue for the community. I glanced at the signature line and saw my name, forged beneath it, a clumsy attempt at deception. I met his gaze. You know this is a felony, right? He didn't blink. I'm just delivering the letter, he said, then turned and walked back down the slope as if nothing about the situation was abnormal. Behind him, the two other men began unloading equipment. I didn't need to guess who was behind this. I simply needed to decide how far I was willing to let her go before activating the protocol again. I was now in a bind. If I stopped the setup myself, she would portray it as aggression. If I allowed them to finish, she would claim community precedent. I watched as a fold-out buffet table was carried onto the deck and slowly opened. I stepped inside and opened the basement hatch. Inside, a secure trunk sat beneath a steel beam, its top still sealed with the DHS tamper sticker from the previous season. I keyed in the access code and opened it. Inside were 3 compact cases, one of which contained the rapid deploy alert beacon. I took it out, armed it, but left the trigger pin in place. This was my insurance policy now, not for show, but for control. Karen arrived around 2 p.m., this time dressed not as an HOA president, but like a wedding coordinator. Her hair was done, her dress freshly steamed. She even wore heels again, sinking slightly into the gravel as she strutted up the path. Her expression was pure confidence, as if the entire world had endorsed her version of reality. "You missed the RSVP cutoff," she said when she saw me, as if we were enacting a romantic comedy. "But don't worry, you're still welcome. This is going to be the best HOA mixer we've ever hosted, and I've already assigned the cabin lounge as the guest welcome zone. We'll need you to unlock it soon." I stood with the beacon in my hand, its LED blinking once every 4 seconds. "You forged my name." Her smile didn't falter. "It was a placeholder. Nobody checks those things anyway." I took a step forward. "You're trying to take over a federal emergency site and turn it into a picnic spot. You don't even understand what you're risking." She tilted her head, as if I were the unreasonable one. "You're being dramatic. I've read the zoning. The cabin is on residential land, and we have a 2/3 vote to designate it as shared space. If you keep resisting, you'll be legally liable." I'd had enough. I stepped aside, opened the front door, and allowed her to walk in. She gasped like a child entering a candy store. "Oh my God, this is perfect. Look at the paneling. Look at the view. This will be perfect for our speaker podium." Then she turned and paused when she saw the square black device blinking in my hand. "What is that?" she asked. "A beacon," I said, "one that activates a federal response if this facility is breached." She laughed, genuinely laughed. "You are so obsessed with this whole federal cover story. Nobody's coming to check on your little cabin. It's just you up here playing ranger." I dropped the device on the table and walked to the hallway. "If you don't believe me, touch that box again. See what happens." She didn't, but she didn't leave either. Instead, she made a show of measuring the kitchen for catering use while her volunteers wandered the main room, placing signs and attaching balloons to the fireplace. It was a complete invasion. But I didn't stop them. I let them continue. At 3:27 p.m., I made a quiet phone call from the basement stairwell, using the secure handset in the floor vault. "This is Ridge Echo 1. Breach Level 2 confirmed. Requesting containment review." The voice that responded was unfamiliar. "Mail firm. Transmission logged. Monitoring activated. Containment options under review." I asked if that meant they were sending someone. The answer was vague. "Protocol escalation depends on environmental threat. If confirmed hostile repurposing occurs, we will intervene." I understood the unspoken meaning. They were watching now. The eye in the sky was already turned towards us, likely recording everything in high definition from 30,000 feet above. At 4:30, a DJ arrived with speakers, lights, and a wireless microphone. I stood on the deck, observing it all unfold like a slow-motion train wreck. Karen paraded around like a senator, assigning places and grinning as if she had just been elected queen of the mountain. But then something unexpected happened. One of the catering crew, clearly not part of her regular entourage, approached me quietly during setup. "Hey," he said, "is it true what people are saying that this cabin's government-controlled?" I didn't answer. He glanced back towards Karen. "I served in wildfire recovery. We had one of these sites in Oregon. Looked different on the outside, but same core. You let her do this?" I looked at him. "I didn't let her. I just haven't stopped her yet." He nodded, then uttered the one thing that shifted the entire day's tone. "You should stop her before someone gets hurt." By 6 p.m., the ridge resembled a wedding rehearsal. Twinkling lights, a snack table, children running around, music playing. Karen raised her plastic wine glass and proclaimed her sentiments about community strength and neighborhood pride. Then she stepped onto the cabin deck and held up the forged permit. "And now I'd like to thank our generous host for opening his property to the people." I stepped forward, calm as could be, and took the microphone from her hand. The music cut off. The crowd fell silent. "I didn't approve this event," I stated clearly. "And this isn't just a cabin. It's an emergency facility under federal protection. You are all here illegally, and if you don't leave in the next 10 minutes, you'll be facing more than just HOA violations." At first, no one noticed the distant hum rising from the east. Karen was too busy attempting to retrieve the microphone from my hand, her smile strained, that nervous twitch in her cheeks appearing as her control began to unravel. She leaned in close and hissed, "If you don't put that toy away and play along, you'll regret it. These are your neighbors." I didn't flinch. I simply stepped back, allowing her to see the beacon now glowing a steady red in my palm. It was not a bluff. The signal had been sent. I had activated the one protocol I swore I would never use outside of an actual disaster. But I had warned her repeatedly, and now the air above the ridge was no longer empty. The first sign came with a shift in the light. Shadows moved in unnatural ways as the drone crossed over the tree line. Silent, matte black, devoid of commercial markings, it was not filming, it was scanning. Some of the crowd began pointing. One of the teenagers, who had been helping with the folding chairs, whispered, "Is that a military drone?" Karen turned her head towards the sky and froze. The smile on her face disintegrated in stages, as if her brain couldn't quite process what her eyes were seeing. The drone circled once, twice, then came to a still hover directly above the cabin, about 50 feet in the air. That's when the siren sounded, not loud, but unmistakable. A low-pitched warble that had no place at a party. People began backing away. Balloons rustled. The music finally ceased for good. Karen attempted to recover. She clapped her hands like a substitute teacher desperately trying to salvage a field trip. "Okay, everybody, that's just a weather drone. Nothing to worry about. The show goes on." But it was too late. The air shifted. I could feel the cabin's temperature control switch from passive to defensive. The panels in the wall buzzed quietly as interior shielding powered on. From inside, I could hear the secondary locks engaging on the basement hatch. That was the system securing itself against breach escalation. Karen had triggered more than just surveillance, she had set the entire site into protected mode. I turned to her, calm but unyielding. "Do you really want to keep pretending you have this under control?" She was shaking now, but she didn't answer. People began to leave in small groups. No panic yet, just confusion, concern, and that whispering dread that rapidly amplifies in the presence of unanswered questions. Karen stood her ground on the deck like a statue left behind in a storm. Her husband approached her, holding out his phone. "Karen," he said, barely above a whisper, "you need to come see this." She looked down at the screen and paled. Apparently, footage of the drone circling the HOA event had already gone viral online. Someone had tagged a government watchdog account. The caption read, "When your HOA thinks it owns everything, but the cabin turns out to be federal." Thousands of views in minutes. Karen looked as if she was going to be sick. She turned to me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in her before, not fear, not anger, just confusion, as if she genuinely couldn't comprehend what was happening. Why would they do this? Why would they send a drone over a neighborhood gathering? I didn't enjoy saying it, but I did anyway. Because this isn't a neighborhood gathering. It's a breach of federal infrastructure. You forged documents. You trespassed. You commandeered a restricted site. This isn't about a picnic anymore, Karen. She stumbled backward, shaking her head. No. No, I didn't mean for. This was just supposed to be a mixer. Nobody said anything about federal. But it was too late for explanations. The sky had already shifted again. I heard the second vehicle before I saw it. Down the ridge road, the crunch of gravel under Siria's tires echoed up towards the cabin. A matte black SUV, clearly not local law enforcement, not bearing any decals, pulled to a slow stop just past the cabin's perimeter sensor. A man in a slate gray field uniform stepped out, his face unreadable, his movements calm. He carried no weapon, he didn't need to. The badge on his chest was not for show. He walked straight up the path with a tablet in one hand and scanned the crowd, now reduced to maybe a dozen shaken residents. No one spoke. Karen's husband instinctively backed away. The agent stopped in front of me and looked down at the beacon still blinking in my hand. "Signal confirmed," he said. "Do you require on-site resolution?" I answered without hesitation, "Yes." The agent turned his head to Karen. "Are you the individual identified in breach footage?" Karen blinked rapidly. This is a misunderstanding. We were just trying to hold a small gathering. Nobody told me this was." He interrupted, his voice calm but final. "Ma'am, this facility is listed under federal emergency continuity protocols. You are not authorized to be here. You have triggered a Level 2 response that includes surveillance, logging, and external documentation of all personnel involved in the unauthorized use." She looked around as if someone might rescue her. No one did. The agent continued, "You are required to vacate immediately. All associated materials and equipment will be confiscated for review." Her eyes widened. "My speakers, my signs." His expression remained unchanged. "Yes, everything." Karen broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, she crumpled onto a folding chair as if her body had finally given up trying to spin the narrative. Her volunteers began packing without being told. One of the teenagers asked if this meant he was in trouble. The agent simply said, "Not unless you touched anything inside." The drone overhead made one final pass before veering off, disappearing towards the mountain crest in a quiet flash of motion. Karen sat there, silent, as her husband finally walked over and crouched beside her. I couldn't hear what he whispered. I didn't want to. The agent turned back to me. "The incident is contained. Secondary review will be processed. Do you need facility recertification?" I nodded. "Please, I want it locked down tighter from now on." He made a few taps on his tablet. "New key code authorization will be issued within 24 hours. Until then, visual perimeter monitoring is active. You're authorized to remain on site." I thanked him, but he didn't linger. He turned, walked back to the SUV, and departed without fanfare. No sirens, no drama, just the calm, cold presence of real authority, the kind Karen had pretended to wield for far too long. When the last of the HOA crowd finally cleared off the ridge, leaving only half-deflated balloons tangled in pine branches and a few abandoned coffee cups, I took a deep breath for the first time all day. The cabin remained secure. The alert had been resolved, but something deeper had shifted. Karen's illusion of control was shattered, not just in the eyes of the HOA, but in her own. She had come here to prove she could take anything she wanted. What she left behind was a warning etched into every square foot of this property. That night, I didn't bother turning on the news. I didn't need to. My phone was already buzzing with forwarded links, clips of the drone, and screen grabs from HOA Facebook groups debating when it actually occurred. But the truth was already out. The cabin wasn't just off limits, it was untouchable. And Karen, once the queen of neighborhood enforcement, was now a cautionary tale, whispered about in group chats, forever immortalized in the surveillance footage of the one party that ended with federal intervention. 2 days passed before I saw her again. I was out back near the edge of the treeline, checking the solar regulators when a familiar voice broke the morning quiet. It was no longer sharp and commanding. This time, it was lower, a little rough, and if I wasn't mistaken, carried a faint trace of something resembling humility. Karen stood halfway up the gravel path, alone, holding a white envelope in her hand as if it might explode. I didn't say anything at first. I just kept working, listening for the real reason she was there. She took a few cautious steps forward and then stopped just far enough that the cabin's perimeter sensor wouldn't trip. She didn't smile, didn't feign confidence, just stared at the envelope for a second, then raised her eyes to me. "I wanted to apologize," she said, not loudly, not dramatically. "And I wanted to give you this." I didn't move from my position near the panels. The last time she showed up bearing papers, she had tried to annex a federal fallback site for cheese platters and sparkling lemonade. So, it was understandable that I wasn't exactly rushing to greet her. She seemed to take that in, pausing again. "I didn't understand what this place was. I thought you were bluffing, that you were just being territorial." She looked up, appearing more tired than I had ever seen her. But I was wrong. She took another slow step forward and placed the envelope gently on a tree stump just outside the boundary line. "I rescinded the event claim. We took it down from the HOA site. The board voted to remove all references to the cabin. No more mixers, no more permit. You're off the map." It was tempting to believe her, but I had learned better than to trust her words alone. So, I walked slowly to the edge of the property and picked up the envelope. Inside was a notarized letter, signed by all 5 board members, including Karen. It formally acknowledged that the cabin was not, and had never been, part of the Falcon Ridge HOA. They were dropping all claims and voluntarily issuing a restriction on future encroachment motions. It wouldn't stop Karen from gossiping, from scheming, or from finding new ways to meddle, but it was something, and it was legally binding. When I looked up from the letter, she was still standing there. "I didn't just come to fix paperwork," she added. "I came to say I made a mistake, and I'll probably never live it down. Not in the neighborhood, not online, not anywhere." I studied her a moment longer. Something in her voice told me this wasn't just a performance. It wasn't full of ego or spin. It was embarrassment. Deep, reluctant embarrassment from someone who believed she owned every room she entered, until she walked into one that wasn't hers. I didn't let her off the hook, but I didn't escalate either. I nodded, folded the letter, and said quietly, "Don't ever come back up here unless you're invited. This isn't personal property. It's not recreational land. It's part of something that runs deeper than the HOA or neighborhood squabbles. You came close to turning it into a national incident." Her eyes dropped. "I know." Then she turned and walked back down the gravel path without another word. That could have been the end. But then came the call. It was 3 days later. My secure line rang, the same tone, the same channel as before. I answered it expecting a follow-up audit. Instead, I heard the voice of the same field agent who had come to the cabin during the drone intervention. "Ridge Echo 1, he said. "Are you aware of the footage circulating from the Falcon Ridge HOA live stream server?" My stomach sank. "No." "What footage?" He explained that someone, probably one of the HOA board members, had uploaded a clean version of the cabin event to their server. The video had been altered to cut out the drone, the federal SUV, and the confrontation. Instead, it showed Karen giving a community speech with a caption that read, "Civic engagement and responsible neighborhood oversight." The footage made it look like she had organized a peaceful event, received cabin access, and led a successful community effort. I stood in the middle of my cabin, listening to the words with a pulsing headache growing behind my eyes. After everything, the exposure, the drones, the documentation, someone had tried to rewrite the ending. Do you know who posted it? I asked. Not yet, the agent replied. But the file was distributed through a Falcon Ridge HOA portal. It's already been copied onto 6 neighborhood sites and 1 local newsletter. We're initiating a takedown, but damage control will require confirmation from you. You'll be asked to attend a private verification session with federal oversight to confirm the cabin's protected status. I agreed immediately. Tell me when and where. He said the time would be set within 48 hours and that they would handle the rest. I spent that night in the cabin's command room, not the main living space, not the deck, but downstairs in the heart of the structure, where the thick walls and reinforced antennas made everything feel heavier. I reviewed the system logs, watched the thermal surveillance playback, and compiled every file from the day Karen turned a casual HOA stunt into a full-blown breach. Then I sent it all off through a secure flash drive drop protocol. There would be no rewriting the past, not when the truth was this well documented, not when the lies could escalate into jurisdictional problems I would be dragged into. The meeting took place at a satellite security station 2 towns over. I walked in with my permit badge, my logs, and 2 layers of ID. The room was quiet, sterile, with no windows. 3 people sat across from me. One was the same agent. The other 2 wore plain clothes, but their questions were anything but casual. They asked me to confirm the cabin's layout, its access points, the timeline of Karen's actions, and the federal response I had triggered. I answered everything honestly. Then they showed me the edited footage. I watched Karen speaking confidently to a small group of people on my cabin deck. I watched her smile and wave as if she had been authorized, as if this was her domain. There was no trace of the drone, no agent, no confrontation, just a curated lie designed to rebuild her image. I stared at the screen for a long second after it ended. Then I handed over my drive. That's the real story, I said. Every sensor ping, every motion flag, every audio capture, it's all in there. The woman on the panel nodded. Thank you. That's more than sufficient. The session lasted another half hour, but the tone shifted after that. I wasn't a suspect, I was a gatekeeper, a civilian operator entrusted with something most people never realized existed. And now I had proven I could defend it, not with force, but with discipline, with documentation, with refusal. A week later, Karen vanished from the HOA board. Quietly, without announcement. Her name was removed from the digital roster. Rumors swirled about why. Some said she had resigned out of embarrassment. Others whispered that the county had opened a formal investigation. I didn't ask, I didn't need to. Whatever story she tried to sell had collapsed under the weight of the real one. As for me, I resumed my life in silence. The cabin remained sealed. The new key protocol was more secure than ever. No more unauthorized visitors. No more fold-out tables or fake inspectors. Just the trees, the wind, and the hum of a protected system watching quietly beneath the floorboards. I had learned a lot from the incident about power, about patience, and about how far people will go to pretend they matter more than they do.